well, cool. Hello, everybody. Hello to the people in the room. Hello to the people online. I'm going to be doing a weird back and forth thing. Actually, you know what I can do? No, I'll use a pen. I'll be good. I can do this, and then I can see you all at the same time. Okay, so. Oh, thank you. I'm one of those, but the texture of writing with a pencil is so nice. How did it take me so long to realize I was neurodivergent, you ask? Well, let's talk about that. Okay, so welcome to today's DIDA/Writing Centre workshop. I'm going to be talking about my experiences of being a neurodivergent person in academia. Since I started school, I've had, I think 3 years that I had, no, 2 years that I haven't been, no, 3 years that I haven't been studying in some way, shape or form. So I basically lived in academic environments, so it is entirely unsurprising that I ended up as an academic. What is surprising is that I ended up as an academic whilst also having undiagnosed neurodivergencies, at least one, probably two. So I was going to, so I've essentially set this presentation up so that it's a bit about me. Here are my experiences of being in academic environments whilst neurodivergent, whilst having no idea that I was neurodivergent, and essentially an evolution of my study skills over that time and sort of the things that I picked up along the way that helped me. And then I'll be talking about my experience of diagnosis and what it's like now to be diagnosed and have a management plan for neurodivergency whilst also academicing. So that's me when I'm not wearing a mask. This was my graduation ceremony, which was last year, because the year that I finished my PhD, the year that my degree was conferred was the plague year. So hello, I'm Dr. Emma Muhlack, but Emma is fine. I have a collection of degrees, which is long, and I'm currently investigating number 5. I'm looking at doing a graduate diploma in education or tertiary pedagogy or something like that. So I wear 2 hats at university. I am a teaching academic in the School of Public Health. So that means that I just teach. I do a little bit of research supervision and stuff as well, but I'm primarily a teaching academic. And I'm also a learning advisor at the Writing Centre. So 4 days a week I'm in public health, 1 day a week I'm at the Writing Centre talking to students about writing, which is a joyful time. I'm also neurodivergent, obviously. So I was diagnosed with ADHD at 36 last year. Late diagnosis of neurodivergency in women is not at all uncommon because women are more strongly socialized to display pro-social behaviors, and a lot of the way that we diagnose neurodivergencies is not displaying pro-social behaviors by being disruptive or problematic. The diagnosis and treatment of my ADHD made it pretty obvious that I probably also got autism. Hello, can I help? Yes, come in, grab a seat. So yes, I'm currently on the wait list for autism assessment, which is 18 months at the moment, so that's going to be a fun time. I love waistcoats, as you've probably noticed. I live in waistcoats. I'm married but have no children, but I am a dog mum. I have 3 dogs who are ridiculous. So if you take nothing else away from this workshop today, the things I want you to know are brains are weird. Ugh, just, God, don't even get me started on the evolutionary weirdness that happens in our brains. The thing about neurodivergent brains is that they are weird, but in different ways to neurotypical brains. They are essentially weird at like the outer ends of the bell curve. The world assumes that you are neurotypical, and if you are undiagnosed, you may also assume that you are neurotypical and wonder why you are struggling things with everybody else seems to be doing fine with. That was certainly my experience. And as part of that being neurodivergent in a neurotypical world, you can internalize some pretty shit things around that. So I really want you to take away from this that being neurodivergent and all of the weirdness that comes with it is not a moral failing. I am still unpacking that one, but I felt it was important to say. So just quickly, for those who aren't aware, ADHD is a neurodevelopmental disorder, which means your brain doesn't develop the way that it typically does. So from a physiological sense, some parts of my brain are underdeveloped. So my prefrontal cortex and my posterior parietal cortex, the brain structures are smaller in those regions. Those are the bits that are responsible for attention and executive function and spatial reasoning, respectively. Also, impaired neurotransmitter systems, which basically means my brain doesn't have enough dopamine, which is a building block for norepinephrine. So I don't get enough of that either. And norepinephrine is really important for a bunch of stuff. So the sections of the brain where this system doesn't work very well in ADHD people, the frontal cortex, again, that's the brain reins, which is how I refer to executive function. The limbic system, which is around emotional regulation, and the basal ganglia and reticular activating systems, which are basically your internal switchboard and your in-out switchboard in your brain. So having ADHD means that some fun things happen. It generally manifests either as broadly inattentive or broadly hyperactive, and some lucky souls like me get the mixed bag, which is known as ADHD combined. So depending on which one you have, you could have things like inattentiveness, issues with uncontrolled hyperfocus, impulsiveness, executive dysfunction issues, which is basically your ability to control your own brain, emotional dysregulation, poor memory, poor spatial awareness, sensory sensitivity, the list goes on. It's also very likely that I have autism. It's not confirmed yet, but it's pretty obvious. Autism is much less straightforward than ADHD. It's very complex, it's multifaceted, and it is a developmental disorder spectrum. So rather than like a little bit autistic to very autistic, that's not how the spectrum works. It's multiple categories, and you can be more neurotypical or more autistic on any of those categories. So things around social and communication skill impairments, so like reading the room, making eye contact, knowing when it's appropriate to enter conversations, etc. There are also various behavioural and personal characteristics, which the diagnostic criteria are terribly mean about. So I've rephrased them so that they're less shit. So stimming, taking some sort of sensory stimulation, whether that's sound, physical, scent, whatever, as a self-soothing mechanism. Strong preference for order and consistency, generally a very focused interest on a particular thing or a small group of things. And also sensory processing issues are common in autism. So that's my neurodivergency, and you can probably see why this is not super fun while studying. So, I was born in '84 and didn't get diagnosed until last year. And until 2020, it did not occur to me that I might be neurodivergent. So this is how I went through life being unknown neurodivergent. So at school, my typical report card comments were things like, Emma would do better if only she applied herself, and Emma is easily distracted, and Emma needs to pay less attention to this thing and more attention to her schoolwork. My grades were all over the place at school, and this was largely determined by whether I was interested in something and whether I was displaying critical thinking skills or whether I was displaying memory recall. Because ADHD means that my brain, like I have a Teflon brain, nothing sticks to it unless I'm interested in it. So I barely passed maths. I was actually failing maths until my maths teacher went to the Queensland Education Board and said, She gets A's in all of the tests where she has the formulas and has to do weird things with them. She understands maths. She just can't remember any of the formulae. And so if we don't give them to her, she fails the tests. So she convinced the board to give me the lowest possible passing grade on maths. In English, I absolutely screamed through the course, got an A+, because I am really interested in language and communication. And I also did really well in ancient history because I'm a history nerd, and my teacher let me write my main assignment for Year 12 Ancient History about the accuracy of the portrayal of Roman legions in the Asterix comics. For academic skills at school, I basically did not have any. I was winging it. I say this not as like a puff me up thing, but as so that you understand the context. I am frighteningly bright. And so I got through school by a wing and a prayer because I didn't need any study skills to get through school. So I was the queen of procrastination. Literally every assignment was written the night before. My chemistry homework was always done in the 10-minute period before chemistry class started. And somehow I got a B+ in chem. I read books under the table in maths, and I could still give the right answers when called on to solve what was on the board. In terms of my actual skills around presenting information, I had absolutely no knowledge or training in how to write. I just read a lot and I kind of vibed it and it worked. This didn't go very well when I got to university. So I started uni doing winemaking, and I did 3 semesters, and these are my grades. In the interest of transparency, I am showing you my coursework transcripts. So in 3 semesters, I passed 15 units. I had a conceded pass for 3 units, which no longer exists. It would be a fail now. And I failed 12 units. So I tanked my first semester. I did reasonably well in engineering physics. It was a maths course and it was open book. So that meant I didn't have to remember anything. I could just do the critical thinking thing. So that was a course that played to my strengths. But 25% in chemistry of biopolymers, that was a lot of memorization and rote learning. And Teflon brain means that didn't work very well. My GPA for my first attempt at university was a fail average. My GPA was 3.25, which not the best, but it's resurrectable. I have described my academic skills at this point as oofed, TM. So there was a lot of crying involved in my first 3 years of university, basically running on adrenaline and stress. Completely failed at rote learning. I would be up until 1 o'clock in the morning desperately trying to learn things, and it didn't work because Teflon brain. So I withdrew after 3 semesters because sciences were not working for me, because I did this degree because it had a job at the end of it, not because it was something I was passionate about. And at that point, I didn't know that my brain was seeking dopamine in all circumstances and would sabotage my attempts to do things that sucked the dopamine out of life. So I went and did a Bachelor of Arts in English and Philosophy, which I finished in 2006. I did reasonably well in this. I only failed 1 course, and that was Introduction to Latin and Ancient Greek. I had a passing average in my undergrad, so it wasn't great, but it wasn't terrible. My worst mark, as I said, was Intro to Latin and Ancient Greek, 34%. Who would have thought a course that involved memorising a whole bunch of vocabulary would not go well for me? My best mark was in Justice, Law and Society. And that is entirely unsurprising. It was a philosophy course. It was about moral philosophy and jurisprudence and concepts of justice, and something that is very common in autistic people is a very highly developed sense of justice. So it is unsurprising I aced that one. My academic skills were improving at this point, mainly because I wasn't trying to do things that my brain would absolutely refuse to do. They were still not great though. I was still spending a lot of time doing late night writing binges to get assignments finished. Contemporary medievalism, I didn't actually read any of the core texts. I only read secondary sources about the core texts, and I still got a credit for that course. Everything was done at the last minute, everything. I didn't start anything more than a week before it was due, and it's reflected in my transcript. I am capable of much better grades, but because I didn't understand how my brain worked, because I didn't have the skills and the scaffolding that I needed to be able to engage with coursework, it all kind of went a bit sideways. Amazingly, despite the fact that my GPA was below 5, I got accepted into an honours degree in philosophy. The reason that I made entry was, one, because they were desperate for warm bodies, because the program was already run in cooperation with Flinders, and if they didn't get enough people, it wasn't going to run that year. But one of my philosophy lecturers actually recommended me to the program. He said, look, I know she doesn't meet the GPA, but she's done reasonably well in her philosophy courses. And the stuff that she's interested in doing for her honours course is the stuff that she's done well in. So let her in anyway. So they did. I got first class honours, which I was not expecting. My honours supervisor called me on the bus and was like, hey, Emma, you got first class honours. And I literally screamed, what, on the bus really loudly. It was completely unexpected. My entire experience of academia up to that point had been barely scraping through as soon as there was any sort of challenge in front of me. And the fact that my honours year was the biggest challenge I'd faced to that date, and I got such a high grade, was astonishing. Part of that was because I was doing my thesis on the ethics of communication, which is my two areas of special interest. I am an ethicist, and I'm fascinated by communication and language and how you can say the same thing 3 ways and have it mean 3 different things. The reason it was such a stressful experience for me, my academic skills were better, but still not great. I still didn't have much control over where my hyperfocus went, but luckily for me, I was working on my special interest, and so my topic deep dives were focused. I actually I rewrote my honours thesis in 3 weeks, not because I procrastinated. In this case, I actually started writing it in the first semester. But I had a computer virus and I thought I had a backup, and I didn't. And so I had to rewrite my entire honours thesis in 3 weeks. The last week before submission, I was literally sleeping under my desk and alternating maps and writing. It was not a good time. And that incredibly stressful situation essentially brought me to what I now understand to be an overload meltdown. Yes, I was also constantly distracted by World of Warcraft that year because my brother bought it for me for Christmas at the end of 3rd year, and that was the person whose brain is constantly seeking dopamine should not be given a computer game that is like a constant drip of dopamine. So I had burnout after my honours year, which I didn't recognise at the time, but it's now very clear. My original goal after doing my honours was to go on and do a PhD. I'd always wanted to do a PhD. When I had originally started my arts degree, I was thinking about majoring in classics and doing my PhD in classics. Again, history nerd. Being incapable of learning a dead language kind of put the kibosh on that one. So once I finished honours, my higher brain functions basically went, nope, you are not capable of anything more complex than tying your shoes, which was a novel experience for somebody who had been very high achieving intellectually her whole life. I decided to embrace it though. I took a job at UDSA in admin. I started as the receptionist and thoroughly enjoyed sorting out their filing system. I got bored a couple of years later and started another degree in 2009, which was my Master of Communication in Public Relations. So I had a distinction average for that degree. If I can get the next, there we go. Well, that's very tiny, apologies. So my grades were reasonable from sort of mid-60s to extremely good, 91 for online public relations. I got 2 credits in this degree, and those 2 credits were the marketing courses, because I hate selling things to people, but they were core courses for the program and I had to do them. The courses that were on things that I was interested in and that I picked myself, I did really well on. Again, if I played to my strengths, if I played to my interests, my ability to focus was excellent. But my study skills were still pretty patchy. As I said, anything to do with my special interests, fine. I could just sink into that. I knew everything. I could just word vomit over it. Anything that was not my special interest, not so much. So in 2020, I graduated from my PhD, which I started in 2015. I don't have a transcript to show you because PhD is pass or fail. But in terms of my quote grades, so the benchmarks that we usually hold up for PhDs, I got 2 publications, well, actually got 4 publications, but only 2 have been published out of my thesis. One of which kind of hit it big in the UK and got ridiculous amounts of media coverage. And the paper, because the paper that it was referring to was open access, it had like over 10,000 reads on BMC Public Health, which was terrifying at the time. My thesis itself only had minor suggestions from one reviewer, and the other reviewer was like, yep, this is fine, give this woman a PhD. And one of the reasons that my PhD went so well was because it was my area of interest. It was around ethics, it was around social construction, the way that we think about things and the way that we build concepts in our heads culturally. So my data analysis skills were really great. I took to qualitative research like a duck to water, absolutely loved it. I will still happily babble about it for hours. My writing skills were not great. I got through coursework fine because I was only writing like 2,000-3,000 word essays, relatively simple structure, one thing. Writing a paper for a journal is much more complicated, and my writing skills were absolutely not up to snuff. So I had 2 Icarus moments. And my first was that in the middle of my PhD, I had a full breakdown. So being undiagnosed with ADHD, finding it very difficult to remember things, finding it very difficult to manage my tasks, finding it very difficult. I also had some issues with my data collection processes, which went awry. I went to my supervisor to have a quick chat about, I'm having some issues and I'd like to talk about them. And about 30 seconds into that turned into a full-on emotional meltdown in front of my supervisor, which resulted in 2 weeks of mental health leave, a generalized anxiety diagnosis. And when I did come back to my PhD, I was part-time on medical grounds. So it was a rough time. However, that was also a bit of a turning point for me. This was where things started to get better. So for a start, I had some excellent support from my primary PhD supervisor. She's neurodivergent herself. Her teaching area and her main research interest is actually in counselling and psychotherapy. So she was the best person to have a breakdown in front of. So she saw that I was really struggling with some of the technical aspects of being a PhD student, not the research, but the research production, the writing. And so she started giving me particular mentorship around writing style and structure for our discipline. She would sit down with me with my drafts and we would go through it paragraph by paragraph and in some cases sentence by sentence to talk about what the structures were and what the standards were of academic writing, which was astonishingly helpful for me. She also gave me a lot of personal mentorship. She gave me a lot of care and a lot of support, and she encouraged me to prioritise self-care and my own well-being, which was kind of foreign to me at the time. So Natalie's just asked in the chat whether I could talk to coming back to the PhD or study after a breakdown. So I didn't just jump straight back into things. So I had my breakdown, I had 2 weeks off, and I also, during that time, I thankfully managed to get in quite quickly to see a psychiatrist, a psychologist who was very good and helped me unpack a lot of the unreasonable expectations that I had of myself. Being a traditionally high achiever and neurodivergent tends to lend itself a bit towards neurotic perfectionism, and I had it in spades. and learning to unpack why I thought the way that I did about myself and why the expectations of myself that I did were really important. Like one of the things that I'm going to talk about today is that a lot of what helped me the most in managing my neurodivergency was, yes, there were particular skills and techniques that I could use, but that was all built on a foundation of perception and a foundation of basically how I treated myself and the expectations that I put on myself, and making those reasonable, which then allowed those other, like I couldn't have used those tools and techniques if I still had unreasonable expectations of myself. If I thought I should just be able to do it, you know, other people can do it, why can't I? Learning that I am me and not other people, and that it was okay to do things the way that I needed to do them, was foundational to me doing this. The other thing that really helped me actually was that I took up a teaching academic position at the beginning of 2019. I'd been teaching as a casual tutor throughout my PhD. I really enjoyed it, but I took up a 0.3 full-time equivalent position and discovered that not only did I love being in the classroom teaching, but I also really loved developing learning materials, designing curriculum, all of the things that came with it, all of the planning, all of the structure, thinking about, you know, from the ground up, how can I make this the best experience for my students? That was incredibly satisfying, and that was a real anchoring point for me. When the PhD was going to shit, I was at least a good teacher. So I completed my PhD at the end of 2019 and submitted, I think, in November. I had my revisions in by the end of January because my examiners were surprisingly swift, and my degree was conferred in March of 2020. So, you know, January 2020, my revisions are in, it's all been approved. I have finished my PhD. All of the changes we needed to make to my course are settled. I am doing a day a week at the Writing Centre now because I finished my PhD. I can relax. And then a global pandemic happened. And it all went a bit to shit. I had elevated stress levels because I was suddenly trying to rejig everything to be online teaching and, you know, just existing. So I had very high emotional and cognitive demands, and this was my Icarus number 2. My brain turned to custard. I essentially went into a low-level protracted meltdown at this point at the end of 2020. I hadn't been seeing my psychologist for a while because everything had been going really well. I'd been ticking over really nicely. That changed in 2020. And this is also when I started to have suspicions about my neurodivergency, and, you know, maybe I should talk to someone about that. So the pathway to me thinking maybe I have ADHD went something like this. Wow, all of these ADHD memes I keep seeing are really relatable. So I'd followed a bunch of neurodivergent academics on Twitter because I had had a student comment in my teaching cells that it was good that I'd talked about neurodivergency and accommodating neurodivergency in class, but that I hadn't actually done a very good job of it. And I was like, well, fair call. I guess I should go learn about neurodivergency and what accommodations are helpful, yada, yada, yada. So I started seeing a lot of ADHD content on Twitter, and I'm just like, wow, so relatable. And I'm like, oh, hey, the organization system that I found during my PhD that is literally the only thing that keeps me on track. That was invented by a guy with ADHD. Cool. These ADHD memes are like uncomfortably relatable. Are they spying on me? And then a friend of mine whose daughter has an ADHD diagnosis said, hey, Emma, have you considered whether you have ADHD? I was like, that's the straw that breaks the camel's back. That's the thing that makes me go, maybe I have. So, okay, I think I've got ADHD. And it was still about a year from that point of, okay, I think I've got ADHD, to actually seeking a diagnosis. Because at the time I was thinking, I've made it this far. Do I really need a diagnosis? Is it really going to be helpful for me? And even without the diagnosis, a strong suspicion of ADHD was still very helpful for me. because what it gave me was a frame of reference and understanding. Once I learned that ADHD brains have an underdeveloped prefrontal cortex, i.e. the bit of your brain that helps regulate impulsivity and decision-making, and you're also chronically low in dopamine, which is an important neurotransmitter and, you know, is like your happy brain chemical. The fact that I was like an inveterate adrenaline junkie and, you know, absent-minded binge eater suddenly made a lot of sense. I'm like, oh, it's not a moral fault that I have. It is literally how my brain structure and my brain chemistry work. So it essentially gave me permission to be kind to myself. Instead of going, everyone else can do it, why can't I? I could say, well, other people can do it, but my brain is literally not structured in a way that lets me do that the same way that they do. And that then gave me permission to advocate for my needs. So a lot of people who've had a late ADHD diagnosis will empathise with this. There is a book called You Mean I'm Not Lazy, Crazy or Stupid that was written by 2 women who were diagnosed as adults with attention deficit disorder, which is what we used to call ADHD inattentive type. And when you are constantly daydreaming, when you are constantly distracted, when you forget your own anniversary, the number of times I have forgotten my anniversary or my husband's birthday or another family member's birthday, phenomenal. I have forgotten to do things that I've told people that I will do for them. I have really struggled to do things that I know I need to do, like housework, starting assignments, functioning, because executive dysfunction is a bitch. And so living with undiagnosed ADHD, you internalize a lot of the things that people say about you being lazy, about you being stupid, about you not caring about people. And none of those things are true. It's that the behaviour that is expected in a neurotypical population is exponentially more difficult in neurodiverse populations. So my diagnosis was actually quite straightforward, and I know this is not the experience that many people have. I'm very lucky that my GP has a referral pathway with an ADHD specialist. And so I went to see him and I'm like, here are all of the screening things that I've done. Here is my list of why I think I have ADHD. And he's like, cool, off you go to the psychiatrist. And the psychiatrist said, okay, so it might take a few sessions to determine if you've got ADHD. Don't feel bad if it takes us 2 or 3. And at the end of the first session, he was like, yeah, you have ADHD. You definitely have ADHD. And that was really surprising to me because I was thinking, you know, I probably have ADHD, but I hadn't really internalized the idea. And I was still thinking of myself as, you know, a neurotypical person who just has problems with some stuff rather than, no, actually, this is a fundamental part of how you function. So what that did was it allowed me to access medical support and it allowed me to be more deliberate about my behavioural supports. So this is where we get into the things Emma does. So behavioural supports, the primary thing that helps me with my ADHD is actually something that I started well before I knew I had ADHD. I started this about a year into my PhD when I realised I had way too many things on my plate. I had too many tasks. I was being overwhelmed by everything. And I'd already started breaking my lists down into subsections and that sort of thing on the advice of someone. But I would still forget things. I would write things down and not know where they were. And I went on Google and I typed in task management system. And I came across the bullet journal system. Full disclosure, if you Google it, you're going to find a lot of stuff that looks like scrapbooking because people took it and ran with it. But the fundamental underlying system is essentially you have a book and that book is everything. So my bullet journal is my forward planner. So for example, for the people online and for the people in the room, this is my overview of my teaching year. I have the semesters out, I have them color-coded, I have all of my teaching commitments, I have all of the lectures that I need to give, etc.
Is this the system that was made by the person with ADHD?
Yes, this is the system that was made by the person with ADHD. And there are a couple of things about this system that make it work really well for me. One, everything is in one place. I don't need to remember where I put something. I put it in the book. It is my planner. So, you know, here's how I manage my overview of my teaching commitments for the year. When I took over a new course this year and I needed to restructure it, you know, this is my, here's what I'm doing with my course. In terms of my, you know, every day, here's what I'm doing and here's my list of stuff. Like, it all goes in the book. So every day I write the day down, I write the date down, I write down all of the appointments that I have. I do manage my appointments in Outlook because otherwise my life would be chaos. Yeah, I write down my appointments, I write down all of the tasks that I have to do. If I go to a meeting or a seminar or something, all of the notes from that go into the book. So, this is from mid-February, before I started teaching. So for the online people, I've got my, you know, task list, and I've got my, here I went to a seminar and here's a whole bunch of notes. And this is how I manage my life. I also have a page for DITCoP and campaign ideas. And it's because it's all in one place. I don't need to go looking for things anywhere. And the other thing that is really important about this system for me is that every day when you sit down, you rewrite your list of things to do. So if you had things on your to-do list yesterday that you didn't do, you rewrite them onto that day's list. And this does two things. One, the actual physical writing down of stuff. There's a lot of research that shows that pen and paper is a much better way to retain information than typing electronically, because it's slower, so you've got more time to process. If you're taking notes, it also means that you're pre-processing because you can't write as much when you're handwriting. And there's just something about the physicality of it that helps the logic in your brain better. And rewriting the list every day, sometimes I don't have to rewrite anything. Sometimes I have to rewrite almost the whole thing. If I have put a task, if I've rewritten a task for 2 weeks, that's a helpful marker for me to go, okay, is this something I actually need to do? And if so, I need to prioritize that task. And if I don't, then why the hell am I rewriting it? So one of the things that I suffer from with executive dysfunction is task management and prioritization. Everything is important. There are a sea of things to do. And by using the bullet journal, first of all, you know, if I'm working on a project, the list of things to do for the project is on that page. And as I pick up those tasks, I put them into my daily list. And having that, here is the overview of everything I need to do, here is the order it needs to be done in, that is incredibly helpful for me. And so that's just the task management stuff. The task prioritization, you know, if I've written it 6 times, that helps me to think about, well, where should I be prioritizing this? So the bullet journal is, I refer to it as the book or my brain. This is literally the only thing that keeps my life functional, essentially. Because even with the medication, and I'll talk about this in a minute, there are things that absolutely have not improved about the way that my brain works. The other thing that has been really helpful is being more aware of myself and how I respond to things and react to things. So when things go poorly, what happened? So funnily enough, with all of the background stress of the last 3 years, well, for me, the background stress of the last 7 years, my meltdowns have become more frequent, and my buffer essentially has been eroded over time between doing a PhD, some things that happened in my life outside of that, and now plague times. So, okay, I had a meltdown. What was I doing in the 2 days beforehand? What were my behaviours? What did I do? What did I did not do? What was different? So that self-observation is helpful for that. And also just like the bullet journal helps with this as well, tracking what I've actually agreed to do. I was talking to Michael on the way here this morning, realised that I have agreed to do approximately twice the number of things that I have time to do between now and week 7. So that's going to be a fun time. I'm still working on that one. And being more aware of my self-care needs. So being better about boundary setting. This is something I'm still very bad at. I'm working on it. And being better at self-acceptance. As I said, having the diagnosis and understanding how my brain works is making that easier, but it is still a work in progress. And I still find myself thinking, why can't I just do the thing? It's like, Emmy, you can't just do the thing, because that is not how your brain works. Be cool with that. For me personally, I found that the recommended medication for ADHD was really helpful. This is not medical advice. But it did fundamentally change how I function. So my medication makes dopamine hang around longer. Yes. I'm on it's a pretty standard stimulant medication. It's a stimulant, which is pretty commonly prescribed for ADHD. It essentially makes dopamine hang around longer in my brain, which means that I get more norepinephrine, which means that the bits of my brain that were suffering from a lack are less so. So things, yeah. So things that have significantly improved for me on medical support are executive function. Before I was on medication, my mind had a mind of its own. That is no longer the case. I now have reins for my brain and I can direct my focus, which was fundamentally life-changing. I cannot overemphasize how different my existence is. I'm much better at impulse control now. I'm still, and all of the dopamine-seeking behaviours are now much better regulated. So now I only eat an entire packet of Tim Tams when I forgot to take my medication. Things that sort of improved. I had a bit of improvement around sensory processing, mainly because now that I'm not fighting my executive function issues all the time, and I can essentially control where my brain goes and what I direct to, my brain is less likely to latch onto things that are giving me sensory processing issues. I still have problems around hearing people in loud environments. I still have issues with sudden loud noises, etc. It did absolutely nothing for my memory or my spatial awareness. I'm still clumsy as hell and I still have Teflon brain. Like I was really excited when I started on the medication. I was like, wow, maybe I don't need the book anymore. Nope. Emma, you still need the book. I'm constantly covered in bruises because I walk into doorways and tables and chairs and I have no spatial awareness whatsoever. So that then led me to suspicion round 2. So maybe I have autism pathway went kind of like, wow, these ADHD medications are working really well. Huh, that's weird. Now I'm doing this thing that just happens to be a very typical autistic trait. That's weird. The autism memes are suspiciously relatable. I made a new friend who's autistic about a year ago, and he sends me autism memes, and I'm just like, these are all really, really relatable. Alistair, please stop doing that. Now, the same friend who suggested to me that I might have ADHD because her daughter has ADHD, her daughter has a dual ADHD autism diagnosis. And again, she came to me and said, hey, Emma, have you thought about whether maybe you're autistic as well? And when I mentioned the ADHD, I thought it was a possibility, but it's actually, it looks really obvious to me now that you might have autism. And I'm like, you were right about the ADHD, so okay. So yeah, I am now referred to Autism SA for assessment. So again, I don't have an official diagnosis. I'm in the position with autism that I was with ADHD a year and a bit ago. And just like then, even though I don't have an official diagnosis, it gives me a really helpful frame of reference and understanding. I now know why eye contact is uncomfortable for me in situations where I'm not in control. I now understand why I am completely oblivious to social undercurrents. I never get the politics. I now understand why it is so difficult for me to know what to do in an interpersonal context where there are not clearly defined parameters. Like, this is fine. I know what this is. I know what I'm doing. I teach. I know what to look for in students. If this was idle chit chat with a cup of tea, this would be actually quite traumatic for me. It also explains why I really love the maths and the order and the strong sense of justice. And it gave me permission to be kind to myself. Again, understanding, oh, it's not just a weird Emma thing. It's not some moral failing that I have difficulty picking up social cues. It's not because I don't care about people. It is literally that my neuroarchitecture makes it difficult for me to read body language unless I'm specifically looking for particular things. There is just too much body language and too much expression going on for me to be able to pick out what's important and what's not. And again, that gives me permission to advocate for my needs. I bought noise cancelling headphones and it was the best damn thing I ever did. I no longer force myself to make eye contact when I'm not comfortable with it. When I went to see my GP the other week, I stared at the corner the whole time because it made me way more comfortable and it was much easier for me. So essentially, if you're neurodivergent, or if you think you might be neurodivergent, what I found fundamental to functioning in that environment is to know yourself. So for things like academic skills, for me, understanding that, yes, I am frighteningly smart, but that is not enough. That does not overcome the fact that my brain is structured a certain way. That does not overcome the fact that I have a particular neurotransmitter profile. I still need support. And so for me, that was things like, I actually had to learn study skills when I was in my 20s. So in my late 20s, when I was doing my Master of Communication, I did that through Deakin, and they actually had some really great support services for mature students, which I was at the time. And they sent me a whole bunch of materials about, you know, you're studying remotely. Here are some processes that you can put in place. Here are some things you should think about. They did regular check-ins with all of their postgrad students. I would get a call from their equivalent of the student centre every 4 or 5 weeks, just to be like, you know, how you going? How's the tracking? Is there anything you haven't found, etc. And so that support structure around developing study skills was really important to me. Learning how my brain worked and working with it instead of fighting it, also really important. Finding the thing that I'm passionate about and focusing on that. Like, everyone says follow your passion, but for neurodivergent people with executive function issues, trying to force yourself to do something that you are not passionate about it's like there is a disconnect between your brain and your body. Your brain, you're just like, okay, brain, do the thing. And brain is like, how do thing? And you're like, no, brain, you literally just have to, you need to open your email and you need to do this. And your brain goes, cool, and then does nothing. So learning to not push myself and learning to work with my brain and to go, you know what, I'm really passionate about this and I've been given leeway in what I teach. So I'm going to focus on the things I care about. Because the most effective teachers I had as an undergrad were the ones who were really passionate about what they were teaching and brought me along with that. And doing what works and not what you think you should do. So I'm shocking at rote learning. Teflon brain, can't do it. And I was told, you know, repetition's really great. It's a great way to learn. You have flashcards, you write things over and over and just repetition. It'll set it into your head. Does not work. I cannot rote learn. I need to have things explained in context. It's one of the reasons that I did so poorly in statistics in first year, because they just told us this is how you do statistics and didn't actually tell us what we were doing or why we were doing it. Even something that is not interesting to me, I find it easier to learn if I understand the broad concepts and how it fits into things generally. I am a chaos brain thinker. I need to understand the context. And so for me, learning that actually I just can't do some learning styles, and I actually need some things that other people don't in order to be able to learn. Doing that and not being worried that other people are going to think that I'm an idiot for constantly asking questions in class. Like, I now know as an academic, I freaking love it when people ask questions in class. And when I go to do my master's in education, I'm absolutely going to be the person who is like peckering the discussion board with questions so that I can get the context and the big picture. One of those important learn to study skills was learning to write properly. As I said, I went through most of my undergraduate on a wing and a prayer. I read a lot, and so I sort of had this intuitive idea about how to write. It wasn't until I did my PhD that I learned what a topic sentence was. Yeah, there was a bunch of stuff when my primary PhD supervisor sat down with me and went, okay, Emma, you need to learn these things because this is how we're going to stop you having another meltdown. I was just like, well, shit. So learning that like 80% of writing is not actually writing. 80% of writing is research, it's figuring out what your argument is, it's figuring out what your structure is, and getting that right before I move on to the writing. Because like I said, special interest, communication, I will sit there and argue with myself for literally an hour about where a comma should go. And so again, working with my brain instead of fighting it, I leave that to the last because I know I'm good at that. I'm really good at the expression. What I was less good at was the structure, as ADHD. So learning how to research and how to plan and how to structure things before I actually started writing was a complete game changer for me. And learning the conventions of writing structures, like, you know, why do we, like, I knew that, you know, if I do a sentence this way, it has this vibe, and if I do it this way, it has this vibe, but I didn't understand why. Again, my brain, I work really well with context. And so learning the conventions of how we structure sentences, of how we structure paragraphs, of how we structure papers as a whole, understanding those contexts meant that my brain worked a lot better and I could be much more effective. In terms of life skills that were kind of fundamental background to this, being kind to myself, learning to listen to what my body had to say and what my emotional responses to things were. I'm still working on this, internalizing that my shortcomings in any given area are not, in fact, a moral failure. Setting boundaries for myself, and sometimes that is setting boundaries against myself. I want to do things because they're fun. The thing with having undiagnosed ADHD for literally decades is that you become a chronic dopamine seeker. And I essentially have the habit of saying yes to things because they're fun. And sometimes I have to say no to things that are fun because it's going to be too much and I'm going to hit my breaking point and I'm going to run out of buffer. And so sometimes those boundaries are with me and they're actually harder than the boundaries with other people, weirdly. Figuring out what my strengths are and embracing them. So I love writing and I love communicating and I love knowing how the pieces of the jigsaw fit together. And so my job at the Writing Centre is brilliant for that. And as a teaching academic, I've actually focused on a pedagogy of care because that learning and that teaching and that support that I can give students, like, you are struggling with this, what do you need to succeed? I'm not good at reading people, but I'm good at helping people to work through stuff and find their solutions because I had to do it myself for so many years. And so I embrace that and I make that part of my teaching, and it is so much more enjoyable as a result. So accepting myself, not trying to be something that I thought I should be, but didn't really want to be, and going, you know what, I'm weird as hell and that's okay. My style is like absurdly colorful Victorian / 1930s academia, and that's fine. Like, you know what, I don't care if people are weird that I wear waistcoats every day and a bow tie half the time, that's fine. I don't care if people think that it's weird that I sing as I walk everywhere because that's part of how I stim, that's one of my soothing things. That's cool, we can go with that. I don't care that people look at me weird when I'm crocheting in lectures or seminars, because again, it's a stim, it helps me concentrate, it helps me be kind to myself. If people have a problem with it, that's their problem, not my problem. So developing a secure sense of who I am and centering in that was a fundamental foundation for me to be able to do everything else. So for me specifically, the things that really helped me, planning out the wazoo. Everything gets planned. ADHD meant that I was like bouncy balls in a blender, and it doesn't work. And I now find that I need to very deliberately plan what I'm doing, whether it's a lecture, whether it's a whole course, whether it's a paper, plan out the wazoo. Also, I found scheduling everything to be really helpful. when I was doing my PhD, I actually had my calendar broken up into like 9 till 11, read, 11 till 12:30, edit paper, 12:30 to 1:30, lunch, 1:30 to 2:30, do this. And so I actually had my task list in my journal, and then I would actually schedule out my day. The Writing Centre has excellent resources on structure failure. Thank you for that comment in the chat. Yeah, by scheduling everything out, that meant that I didn't feel bad about taking breaks, because I'm like, well, no, I've got time scheduled to do this thing, that's fine. And by scheduling and sticking to the schedule, it meant that I didn't do other things that were possibly more fun, but less helpful. And it helped me to stick to the task management. So there's just been a question in the chat. When you have no executive function, how do you remember to make yourself do the planning? So I know some people use electronic reminders. So Google's great for that. I do that at home if I'm like, oh, I have to do the thing, but I'm doing something else. Or be like, remind me in half an hour to do whatever. And it'll be like, I have a reminder for Captain, because I tell it to call me Captain, because that's how I roll. For me, look, to be honest, so the reason that I got good at keeping to the schedule was because if I didn't, everything went to hell. And being a perfectionist at the neuroticism end of the spectrum, that was enough motivation for me to go, actually, no, I need to do this, because the fear of not doing it was enough to kick me into line. The adrenaline helped. So there's a concept in called body doubling, which is where you literally just put yourself in a room with someone, and we don't entirely know how it works, but it's essentially like, it's the like whole being surveilled thing, like someone else is here, I should do the thing I'm meant to do. So if you have a friend, like organizing a time where you sit down together like each week and sort your week out, and organizing time where you can be with other people to do things, body doubling is really helpful. It helps me super a lot. So as well as scheduling out the wazoo, learning what made me comfortable and being unapologetic about being comfortable, because being uncomfortable is not good for learning. So going, you know what, I need to crochet while I read papers. And if people think I'm slacking off in the office, not my problem, it's helping me. And also being reasonable in your workload. This is something I'm still trying to learn. But when I did my undergraduate, I didn't actually take a full-time load in any semester for my arts degree, partly because I started midway through the year, but also because I found it difficult to manage 4 courses at once. 3 courses was okay, but I did 4 courses in my first semester, and I was just like, oh, yeah, no. I thought it would be okay now that I'm doing sciences, but the arts are still giving me grief. So that's it from me.